So, how are we doing today, boys and girls? I would like to welcome you back to another episode of Iron Wing Reviews here in the bunker. So, today I wanted to bring you a review that is a little out of the ordinary for me, as I have done firearm reviews in the past, but this is a bit more of an archaic design when compared to today's high-velocity, small-caliber firearms. The reason I am bringing you this instead of my normal comparison video, as I know I promised you guys I would get back on track with my Marlin Camp Carbine and Mini 14 review, is that I had my stitches pulled last week on Christmas Day and the wound reopened, so for the time being I am on bed rest by doctor's orders for the next month. Doc says I need to let the wound seal and reheal itself, but anyway, let's get back on to today's topic. Today I am bringing you a review of my Thompson Center Renegade Hunter. It is a 50 caliber muzzle loader, and unfortunately I don't have an exact year of manufacture, as even Thompson Center had some issues tracking the serial number range. I can tell you it is kind of a guess that it was made somewhere in the mid-90s to early 2000s, but even telltale parts like this dolphin head hammer are easily replaced and are easily sourced from sites like Track of the Wolf. So I can't even really guarantee you that date because they are easily found and bought and replaced. So anyway, let's get into a little bit of light history regarding this rifle. In the 1970s, Thompson Center muzzle loaders was introduced when the hobby of black powder shooting was still very niche. There weren't any reproductions really being made prior to the 1970s, with most black powder rifles being original Civil War era relics. My source for that info is kind of from the book The Advanced Black Powder Hunting by Toby Bridges. The Thompson Center muzzleloader line was meant to be a jack of all trades, where most muzzleloading rifles were either designed to shoot exclusively round balls or bullets, while the Thompson Center was meant to shoot both. The rifle is 8 to 9 pounds and is 48 inches overall. It has a 26 to 27 inch barrel and a 13-inch length of pull, which I quite prefer or like because it enables me to get a bit more leverage for pulling the trigger. Speaking of the trigger, it is fairly hefty, taking a effort to pull, probably close to 8 to 9 pounds of pull weight. Mind, I have no way of measuring that accurately. I'm just kind of comparing it to the trigger that feels closest to it in my collection, which in this case is my Marlin Camp Carbine. That I know for sure is an 8 to 9 pound trigger because that's what it says from the factory page. Even so, the trigger is extremely crisp and breaks like glass when pulled, giving very little take-up. Given the rifle is single shot and a muzzleloader, trigger reset really isn't a thing like it is on most modern rifles. Anyway, back to the actual rifle itself. Thompson Center Hawkins was the first in a line introduced in the 1970s, and it was fairly revolutionary since most reproductions at the time were lower caliber, 40 to 45. They were often made in Japan or Italy, and in America no one had really started reproducing black powder firearms because you were still very much in that era of almost space-age technologies, with things like the AR-15 only coming out the previous decade. However, what really made Thompson Centers different and sell like hotcakes, pushed it out of kind of that niche zone, was the movie Jeremiah Johnson starring Robert Redford, as many people will say. In that film, he finds the rifle very similar, if not the same, as a Thompson Center Hawkins, found frozen in the hands of a character named Hatchet Jack. Now, my rifle is not a Hawkins, it's a Thompson Center Renegade Hunter, but what that means is it is much more historically accurate. It has blued steel furniture and a butt plate instead of brass like you would see on other modern Hawken reproductions. It also lacks the patch box and is a hunter's model, so it only has a single trigger with an enlarged trigger guard to allow room for a thickly gloved hand to pull the trigger in like a cold northeastern winter. Unfortunately, due to the lack of the double-set triggers, I do find this rifle slightly inferior to the Hawken or original Renegade line, because with that heavier trigger pull I mentioned earlier, it is usable, but I think it needs to break in with the exception of a gouge in the stock from someone tightening up the action screw. The rifle is almost completely mint with a mirror of a barrel. I bought this rifle at a pawn shop for $300, and I think that it is a fantastic deal. You might even be asking yourself why, despite the price, I settled on this rifle when I do have some serious issues with it. And the simple answer is I kind of prefer the blued steel furniture, which is easier to maintain, easier to care for than brass. and it doesn't damage as easily because brass being so soft, it has the tendency to deform or crack. While that might be good, I am unfortunately, I can't find a normal Renegade. I don't really care for the brass furniture of regular Hawken reproduction, so I kind of settled on this rifle. It does shoot well. It's accurate to about 100 yards, putting golf ball-sized holes in 3-shot groups at 100 yards. But while that's good, I'm able to stack one round on top of another with my friend's Hawken rifle at the same distance because of the double-set triggers. Another question some of you might be asking also is why I only just got into muzzleloading a few months ago. Well, the simple answer to that is I shot a friend's Japanese-made reproduction of a Kentucky long rifle, and it had a single trigger, was almost as tall as both of us, not stacked one on top of another, but just probably close to a 5 to 6 foot rifle. And this was about 5 years ago. I met up with him at the range one weekend, and he was just shooting it. Target shooting, having some fun, and I've never shot a muzzleloader, so he offered to let me take a shot. I found it slender, long, and extremely front-heavy. I also found it to be fairly inaccurate, awkward, and unwieldy. This, in all likelihood, is either because of the build quality from Japan, or because of the fact that he was shooting already, so he may not have cleaned out the bore for me to shoot. That single shot basically tainted my view of muzzleloaders for years, and because I didn't know anything about them, I reasoned all rifles kind of had to be like that one. As such, that single shot pretty much kept me from getting into muzzleloading rifles or pistols, despite my love of Western firearms for almost a decade, despite that type of firearm being very predominantly what was used during the Western era, despite what popular culture would make you think, that being that Winchesters were more used, or Colt Peacemakers. So, another thing I find myself asking is what improvements could be made to my rifle in particular. Well, with the exception of a trigger job, replacing it with double set triggers and carving out the stock to hold them, I would probably install a rear peep sight, as I find that a longer sight radius and peep sights are easier to use than buckhorns halfway down the barrel. I would also probably buy a musket cap nipple, as the smaller number 10 or 11 caps are functional, but I find that musket caps from the company like Schutzen are far more reliable than the smaller percussion caps. So, why did I make this video today? Well, not only to review a rifle I bought, as God knows plenty of Thompson Center Hawkins exist, and plenty of reviews. Sorry, my dog. Plenty of Thompson Center Hawken reviews exist on YouTube. You can pretty much find one from every major gun tuber in the website. So, I wanted to make an argument that's fairly unique for me, because in the year that we find everyone obsessed with capacity, common ammunition, and supply shortages, one of the things that never really sold out in my area was black powder supplies. We see things like 9mm, 5.56, and 22 LR running out like they did in 2012, 2013, but we also found rounds like 30-30, 30-06, and 38 Special disappearing, and they have yet to return in my local area. They're slowly returning elsewhere, but I haven't found a single box of that ammo in almost 2 years. So, in all this time, the one thing you've never been able to not get is caps, black powder, and lead balls. It's because of this I kind of want to argue that the ultimate prepper firearm, where most people think it's like a 22, a 12 gauge, 5.56 AR-15, I would argue it's actually a muzzleloader, especially a traditional cap or flintlock rifle. As I said, the supplies are readily available, even during panic buying and supplies being completely stripped. And that means that you can easily stock up and keep yourself supplied and ready. Then when things do go nuts, or when supplies become extremely restricted, you'll be set. Even long after self-contained factory and hand-loaded ammo disappears. There is a reason why long after rifles like the Springfield Trapdoor and Winchester repeating rifle were introduced, mountain men still used muzzle-loading flintlock rifles. Not because they are more reliable or more powerful, although one could argue that any flintlock rifle was easily more powerful than the early Winchester carbines. No, it's more because they were able to keep around a few spare flints on their person, and keeping a keg of gunpowder and a pig of lead in their camp or cabin was easier than keeping brass, bullet molds, primers, tools, and bullets for reloading cartridges or having to source out percussion caps. With flintlock rifles, men very rarely had to make trips to traders or forts. Usually, the only time they had to go down there was when they had too many pelts or they ran out of lead and powder and needed supplies. That's kind of what makes the caplock muzzleloader or even a flintlock the perfect prepper rifle, the ability to be self-sufficient. You are limited to a single shot, or if you have a double rifle, 2 shots, but the ability to cast your own pure lead bullets without any other materials needed, no alloys, the use of loose powder, and not needing to be reliant on industry or manufacturers to provide you with a means of setting off your rifle. Add in that because black powder is still a very niche community within the 2A community as a whole, components like powder, ball, and caps really haven't increased in price compared to primers, projectiles for rifles, and brass. So, with that, the question becomes, can I recommend you pick up a Thompson Center muzzleloader? If you find it in decent condition or for a decent price, because with black powder there's always the risk of sewer piping, of course, they're accurate, they're powerful, able to take most game in North America, and they're a heck of a lot of fun to shoot. Even when you're just reloading at the range, you kind of find yourself going into this zen or relaxed state because it's so enjoyable. You can just let yourself go. You still have to keep focused on what you're doing so you don't double charge or just put in a ball instead of a ball and powder. But I'd absolutely pick up one of these rifles, as you'll never have more fun in your life, and you'll always have something guaranteed that you can use to put meat on your table or take down to the range on a Saturday, even when everyone else in your area can't get their hands on the ammo they need. So, with that, I appreciate you listening, watching. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. Thank you for watching. This is IronWings3187 signing off. Go ahead and hit the like button and leave a comment down below. What do you think about the Thompson Center line of rifles? Also, hit that subscribe button if you think I earned it. Thank you for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you guys next year.